Ashkelon, Ekron. Those are 3 of the 5 Philistine towns. There's another 2, one called Gat and one called... What's the other one called? Azar, Ashkelon, Ekron. There's another one. Forget them all. Oh, what's the name? No, they took Gezer as well. So the Yehuda did quite a lot. Kalev conquered Hebron. There's the Yevusi, Binyamin did not take out. Yosef didn't take out. Naphtali, Zevulun, Asher, and they lived amongst the Canaanites. That was the picture we had in chapter 1. And to the point that they, as we said, they made a what we call a 2-state solution, right? And in Pasuk Lamed Vav, is the way the Malbim reads it, that they came to terms with the fact that this was going to be the permanent situation, that the Jews will not conquer the whole of the land. And that seems to be the point that God knows. The fact that they were slow to doing it, and maybe even lazy or scared or whatever reason you explain why they didn't do it, doesn't justify coming to terms with it. And that's that point God sent a messenger, which we said means a prophet, and he told them that God was very upset, and from now on he's not going to help you. Up till now he was helping you, now you're going to do it on your own. And now you've lost the divine help that God should help you, and therefore it's going to be more difficult from now on. That was the beginning of chapter 2. And then we took a break. And we sort of went back in the story to describe how things were during the whole period of the prophet, of the Shoftim. Starts with the death of, it even starts in the life of Yeshua, right? Yeshua didn't conquer everything. He sent the tribes, each one to conquer their own units. And after he dies, they should do that. Basically, the Jews served God during the life of Yeshua, during the life of the elders who lived after Yeshua, who were themselves old enough to have seen the miracles of the plagues, the crossing of the Red Sea, the miracles through the desert, and during their lifetime, the Jews continued to keep the Torah. Only after they died, then things changed, and they slowly went from bad to worse. We describe the stages. They would stop keeping all the mitzvahs, then they would start having some sort of Hanukkah bush we talked about, right? Some type of mixture between Judaism and their pagan practices of their neighbors, and slowly they started to worship the other gods, and then eventually they forgot about God altogether and just followed the pagan the pagan religions of their neighbors. And just like that, the Jews went away from observance stages, God punished them in stages as well. And the idea of that is the point of the punishment is in order for people to wake up. So God said, you didn't do this, so the first thing would happen is there would be terrorist attacks, which means that they would be attacked, their houses would be burnt, their fields would be burnt down, and but there was no full-out war against their enemies. And then if the Jews didn't take that as a serious message, then and they went further and further into their decline, then there would be war, and then they would lose in war, or they would lose battles where they were outnumbered. And then if they still didn't take the message, they would lose battles even they had the advantage, even though they had the natural advantage over their neighbors, they would lose. That's how the Malbim describes the different stages which correspond to the stages of the people's decline. The same was the punishment. Okay. Then what would happen, and this is really a summary of the whole of the book of Shoftim, people would then, under pressure, turn back to God, and then God would send someone to save them. We pointed that out last time, we should be just finishing this point, was that it seems that there were sometimes different reactions. I mean, sometimes the Jews would have a shofet who would save them and be successful the whole of the period of the shofet, and sometimes it was only temporarily, and even during his lifetime, they were still being attacked, like Shimshon and like Gidon, I think, that we'll find someone more successful. Even the Apostle describes that. But it doesn't really say why it was sometimes one way and sometimes the other way. It's not clear in the Apostle. I think it depends on how sincere they were in their returning to God. They were under a lot of pressure. It says that very clearly. Like Yatzar Lahem, they were under a lot of pressure. Sometimes they returned just because of the pressure. They knew the address to turn to was God, but they weren't sincere in their teshuvah. And then God would send someone who would help them, but only temporarily. If their teshuvah was sincere, it's true they needed waking up. Right? But even if a person needs a wake-up call, doesn't mean his teshuvah isn't sincere. Okay, it doesn't have to be he discovered God on his own like Rabbi Leader did. Right? Sometimes a wake-up call is enough to remind a person, and then he takes it seriously. Then they would be sent to shofet, who would be very inspiring, tremendous tzaddik, who would then inspire them to complete their teshuvah, and then they would be for many, many years live at peace and be successful. And I think that's a summary, and we'll see it as we go through. That's where we're up to. Let's continue. We got sidetracked towards the end of Parshat Yud Ches. And we started talking about stories, and we got a bit sidetracked. Yeah, about the story. That was my fault because I wanted to tell you a story.
It's usually my fault.
Yes, let's start from Parshat Yud Ches again. V'chi heikim Hashem lahem shoftim. We really should start from Yud Zayin. Or Parshat Zayin. Vayakim Hashem shoftim. God would establish a shofet. Vayoshim, He would save them. Miyad sheisayim, from those who came to attack them. That was the standard process. However, Gamel Shoftim, they didn't always listen to their Shevet either. For they continued to follow the other gods. They bowed to them. So very quickly they went back to their bad ways, which their forefathers went. They went away from the ways that their forefathers went to listen to the words of God. They didn't follow the ways of their forefathers who were faithful to God. Now, sometimes, this is the way the Malbim reads it. V'chi means, are you with me? You don't have a copy. You want a copy like we've got? You've got a copy, right? Whatever, whichever is better for you. Right, we're on chapter base, Pasuk Yud Ches. V'chi heikim Hashem. When God established for them Shoftim v'hoya Hashem im ha-shofet, and God was with the shofet. It wasn't just He sent them a shofet and the shofet saved them. Sometimes God's with, and when God's with you, that means it's supernatural. So if God was with the shofet, then He would save them from the hands of their enemies all the days of the shofet. Not like we described in the previous pasuk that they would go back and see. It's not so clear. Right? Well, that's where the Malbim reads it. The first pasuk is saying if they didn't listen to God, then the God was not with the shofet all these days, and the enemies would come to attack. Even when the shofet was leading them, they would be attacked, and the shofet would have to fight them, and it was back and forth. Like in the story of Shimshon, we'll see, it was back and forth, and the Philistines came again, and Shimshon saved them. It was like that. That was because God wasn't really with them. But when you would have a shofet who God was with, then He would save them during the whole of the time of the shofet, because God had reconsidered because of their crying out to Him, because of the pressure they were under. So those are the two stories that we'll see as we go. So sometimes, as I would say, it was sincere teshuvah, and then God would help send them a shofet who was tremendous, who was always a great shofet, but sometimes it was a shofet who was super, and then you got supernatural help, and then it would be peace for many, many years. And other times it wasn't like that. However, either way, Parshat Yud Tes, that's where we're carrying on from. Open up. Parshat Yud Tes, page 5. But Moisha Shofet, when the Shofet died, then either way, either type of Shofet, when he died, Yashuvu, they would go back. So we usually where the word Teshuvah means to go back to God, but it doesn't really mean that. But Teshuvah just means to go back. You can go back to God or go back to misbehaving. Either way. Yashuvu, they would return. V'hishchisu, and they would be corrupt. Me'avoisam, even more than their forefathers. So that means there was a slow descent, even though it had its blips, right, where they would do tshuva, but was gradually going down to the descent in their misbehavior.
So it's like one step forward, two steps back.
That's something like that's what it sounds like. Even when they went back, I mean the idea is like this: you just saw a great shofet, you just saw God's message, and you still ignored it and went back. That itself is more corrupt. Instead of learning from experience. To follow other gods, to worship them, to bow down to them, which is even more serious than just working like you can worship a God without bowing down to Him. Like our Christmas bush, right? Our Hanukkah bush, right? It's pagan practice, but they're not actually accepting them as your God. They did not fall. Now, when you say to fall, you can either fall yourself when you fall down, right? Or to make something else fall. So lehapil means to make something else fall. That's why there's a hay there. Right? Lipol is to fall, lehapil is to make something else fall. Now, what it means over here is, of their evil ways, which is what ma'al aleihem means, their activities, they didn't let fall. It means they didn't let it, how do you say?
Fall out of their hands.
Fall, yeah, it hits in the sense of their, from their bad behavior. It means they continue to do their bad behavior. You just thought they'd given that up. No, they didn't give that up. They went back to their old practices. And Midarakam had kosher, and from their, well, kosher really means difficult ways, right? But it really means bad ways.
Stubborn ways.
Okay, Vayicharaf Hashem Yisrael, and God would get angry with Israel. Now, I think that Pasuk Chaf is actually like really going back to the continuation over here. I mean, this chapter sort of built funny. We had the prophet coming to speak to them, telling them off. Then we went to describe the whole of the book of Shoftim in short, how the pattern was up and down the Shoftim. Okay. Now we're going back to the original story and describing God's anger with them at the beginning of the story. That's from Pasuk Chaf. Yicharaf Hashem b'Yisrael, and God got angry with them. It's not saying God would get in the part of the process. God got angry, which is what said would happen. Yicharaf Hashem b'Yisrael. God got angry with the Jews, and he said, Ya'an means since. Asher avru hagoy hazeh, this nation has transgressed es brisi, my covenant, asher tzivisi, that I commanded us avoisam their forefathers, v'lo shamu l'koil, didn't listen to me. What exactly was it they were doing wrong? It's not clear. What does it mean? What were they doing wrong?
Can they go back to the old ways of worshipping other?
Correct. But then it's, well, yes, that's what's described up till Pasuk Chaf, was the general pattern. Right, this is not, you gotta get it right. This is not a continuation of Pasuk Yud Tes.
This is like Velo Shamu Lekoli, so he sent a shofet with his voice to again give them not a Sinai experience, but like a supernatural experience, and then even they didn't, because before.
But what was it that they weren't doing?
Listening to that voice of like
to do what?
To like the experiential
Well, let's see.
voice.
Let's go. No, you don't need to say that. Let's go back to the beginning of the chapter. What does it say at the beginning of the chapter? The angel came and he said, God said, I have brought you out of Egypt. I brought you to this land which I swore to your forefathers. I said that I will not break my covenant with you forever. But you must keep your promise not to make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land and smash their altars, and you didn't listen to my voice. What have you done? And therefore I also said I will not drive out these people from you, and they will be a pain, and you will worship their gods. So it's clear that we're referring not to the fact they didn't keep Shabbos or they didn't wear tefillin. We're referring to very specific instruction. What is it, the command of God? The command to drive out the nations from the land. That's what it said at the beginning of chapter 2. And then we took a break to describe the whole of the period of the Shoftim, and now we're going back to continue that message. That God is saying, it's really a repetition, it's the same thing, you didn't listen to my voice, right? And now because of that, you didn't drive them out, I'm not going to drive them out either. It means you didn't drive them because you couldn't be bothered, or because of the United Nations, or because you're a small animal. I don't know, whatever your reason of why you decided, we don't know why, but they didn't drive out these people. God said, you didn't drive them out. So I'm not going to help you drive them out even when you want to. On the contrary, they're going to be a pain, and they're going to be a stumbling block that you're going to worship their gods. So they're going to be a physical pain and a spiritual pain. But what they'd done wrong was that they hadn't driven them out. And that's what you find over here. Yicharaf Hashem b'Yisrael, so God got angry. See, it's not a continuation of Parshat Yud Tes, right? Which was the general picture, right? It's unfortunate because you would expect there to be a samach over here to show this is a new thing.
Yes.
Right? But there is a samach at the beginning of it.
Where?
At the Parshat Yud Aleph. Or sorry, there's a pay. Parshat Vav is a pay. What does that pay indicate? Whole new subject. What is this? It's not a continuation. It is a brief summary of the book of Shoftim, describing what's going to happen. And then it would have been nicer if Pasuk Chaf, which I believe is a continuation of that, to have another page to show that all this bit was in bracket. It's not. But you'll see why it's important to read the letters. Because you see, it says, God has got angry with you because you didn't listen to his voice. Gamani. What does it mean, Gamani?
Also
Who's speaking?
God.
Did God write this book?
The Navi.
The Navi. What does it mean, Gamani? Also I. The Navi who wrote these books writing Gamani? No, this is the words of this prophet from the beginning of the chapter.
Wow.
The prophet started, Vayomer A'ale Eschem, I will bring you up. So you see that prophet is speaking on behalf of God in the first person. I. So then we took a break to describe the whole period of Shoftim. Now we're going back to that story. God has continued to speak. Right? Why was it like that? That's a good question. But that's the way to read this. Okay. Gamani, so also I, just like you didn't keep your promise to drive out the goyim, I won't keep my promise and I won't drive out the goyim to help you. Lo osif lahorish ish mipneihem. I will not continue to drive out a man in front of you, min hagoyim, from the nations, asher azav Yehoshua, that Yehoshua left vayomotz. That means there were some nations left that Yehoshua didn't drive out. And you were supposed to drive them out. That was your job to drive them out. And you didn't bother, so now I'm not going to help you drive them out. Now, lema'an. In order that, nasot bam es Yisrael, to test the Jewish people, hashomrim, will they guard, haim, will they guard, as derech Hashem, the way of God, lechaz bam, to follow the way of God, kasher shamru, like their forefathers did, imloi, or not.
I had a very, it was very puzzling for me to read this passage, because didn't we see before like a billion times that they did not follow the ways of the forefathers, that they did not show? No,
you've read it wrong. Now, I think this pasuk is very, very puzzling, but not because of your puzzle. No, it's saying their forefathers did the way of God. This is a whole summary of the book of Shoftim. It's 350 years long. We're going back to the beginning of the story.
Right. Okay.
And we're saying, you guys in Bochim, remember the place was called Bochim, and they started to cry because the prophet told them they were evil and they were bad? You guys were being tested to see if you would follow the way of your forefathers. The forefathers means the Jews who lived at the time of Yehoshua and the Zakanim, who were from, kept the mitzvahs, did exactly what they're supposed to do. Then when those two generations died, the generation of Yeshua and the leaders who followed him, who were younger than him, and they died out, then the people didn't follow the ways of God. What particularly was it? Right? The first thing she's referring to is they didn't drive out the nations who had been left. Now, the problem, which I think, if you read the supervision, I've tried it many, many times, eventually I realize what it's saying, not because the Malbim explains it, right? But the point is God leaving these nations as a punishment, or is it as a test? It says over here that because you didn't drive them out, I'm not going to drive them out. Now, is that punishment or a test? That's a punishment, right? And it said at the beginning of chapter 2 as well, right? This is the punishment. But now God says, you know why I'm doing this? In order to test you. So what is it? Is it punishment or a test? So Dylan says, it's both, right? Yeah. Rabbi Berger, right? It's not really right. Yeah? That's what you said? No, but I don't think that's, like, what does God want from me? You could read it like that. I agree. You could, but a punishment isn't a test. A punishment is a wake-up call. You know that you're doing something wrong, so get it right.
It could be both, though, because it's like what's the idea? Like, okay, I do an avera, and then I get a punishment like right away, like the same day something bad happens to me.
Right.
Like it's right. I'd rather have that happen to me, and Hashem is asking me and saying, "You did something wrong. Change it right now."
What? That's a test?
Yeah.
Not really.
Well, I'd rather have that than than all of my avera build up, and then I get my punishment in one boom in 20 years, or in Olam Haba, or any other place.
Fine. So I agree that punishment is good. But punishment comes from Rachamim.
I'm saying immediate punishment is a test, because immediate punishment is saying you did something wrong, you're getting punished right now, fix it now. You have the chance now. It's a test.
Yeah. No, the test is, let's see if you will not do something wrong.
Yeah, right.
And the punishment is you already did something wrong. So the test is, you see pretty lady on the street, you don't look. The punishment is, you looked and now you bumped your head. they're mutually exclusive. Like it's two.
Yeah, I don't know if they're mutually exclusive, but the question is that's what's going on. I tell you, if you read the Psukim properly, you'll see it's confusing, but I think you'll agree with it after you read it properly. It's referring to two different things, which is when Yeshua died, there were some nations that the Philistines hadn't been conquered, right? And there were many areas that hadn't been conquered. That wasn't an Aveira. That wasn't Yeshua to blame. God did that to test the next generation. Okay? What did he want to test? Now, I want to see if you're going to continue this fight. When you had Yeshua, that's great. He's great, miraculous, amazing leader, student of Moshe Rabbeinu, doing miracles all over the place. That's not such a big test. After he died, God said, I purposely left some of the land unconquered to see whether you would continue to do it after Yeshua died. When they didn't do that, they now were being punished and God won't help them.
That doesn't make sense, the order.
No, well, let's read it slowly. No, I know it. Look, read it slowly, you'll see what I'm saying is correct. God got angry with them. He said, you now didn't do it. I'm not going to drive them out. The nations that are left after Yeshua died, which was in order to test them. He's not saying I'm not going to help you now to test you. The to test you is to explain why they were left at the time of Yeshua. Read it again. You didn't drive them out now. You, that is third generation. I'm not going to help you either to drive out the nations that were left after the death of Yeshua, which was to test you. So there's two different stages going on here. The original thing was a test. Since they didn't pass that test, they're now being punished. And you'll see that it carries on, I think, very nicely, because it says like this. Vayanach Hashem es hagoyim, God left these nations, levilti, not to drive them out by hair quickly, even though Yeshua was driving them out quickly. God says, take a pause, I want to go slowly, because you're going to get rid of them all, right? And then there's no one to test the next generation. V'lo nasanam b'yad Yeshua, didn't give him in the hands of Yeshua. There was for the original purpose to test the next generation. And it continues. Pasuk Aleph. These are the nations Asher hiniach Hashem lenasa isbom. Because we're not talking about the nations that were there to punish them. That's later on in the story. The nations that were left in the times of Yeshua, right? Now, you'll see, Pasuk Gimel says, who are these nations? The Philistines. But if this was talking about the ones who are left over now, it's not true. They conquered the Philistines. We learned in chapter 1 that Yehuda did conquer the Philistines. What does it mean here they're left over? Right? Here it says, it's true there's 5 Philistine towns, but 3 of them it said they conquered, and here it says they left over all 5. The answer is this chapter is describing that which was left in the times of Yeshua, when Yeshua died. And the elders after him, they still didn't conquer everything. That was all the Philistines were left. And then Yehuda came and conquered 3 of them. And God said, why don't you conquer the other 2? That's why you're being punished. Why don't you conquer this? That's why you're being punished. But he was describing that which was left in the times of Yeshua, and that was in order to test them. These are the nations around Israel, or part of Israel, part of the land they were supposed to conquer. Now, to test who? Which generation? Those Jews that didn't know Kol Milchamas, they weren't part of the wars of Canaan. Because they were youngsters when Yeshua fought. Then the Zakanim lived another 30, 40 years afterwards. They weren't part of those battles. Those people are the ones who were being tested. To see what? Whether they would carry on to the fight. Now, Pasuk Beis is a very, very difficult Pasuk. I don't know how Artscott translated it. It's not so difficult to translate the words. But how you put all the words together and then how it fits into the rest of the chapter is a bit of a challenge. Let's translate the word first. Rak, just or only. Lema'an,
in order to.
Da'as,
knowledge, knowing.
Dorot,
generations.
Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel. Lelamdom, to teach them. Right? Lilmod would be to learn. Lelamed is to teach. Right. To teach them. Milchama, war. Rak, only. Asher lefanim, those who were
to their faces.
Yes, but it can also mean beforehand, like from the word lifnei.
Okay.
Right? There's a relationship between your face and beforehand, because your face is a bit that's in front of you, as opposed to your back. Okay, so it's in front, just like what's happened is in front of you. Well, it depends how you describe. Different way to describe it. Lo yida'um, they did not know. Again, only in order to know the generations of the children of Israel, to teach them war, only those who beforehand did not know. What's going on? What sort of syntax problem have the author got? It's a real problem, right? So Rashi says what it's trying to say is this was the first generation who had to learn war tactics. The Jewish people originally, when they conquered the land of Israel, were not trained soldiers. Anyone over the age of 20, between 20 and 60, had to fight, right? And they had units, but they didn't train. They didn't learn how to be commandos and how to be paratroopers. And no, they just went in where the shofar. You've seen what they did against Yericho, right? They went in the shofar. Everyone blew their shofar. The walls came down. And what did they do? They went in and killed them. Did they train how to kill? You would have presumed yes. Who can think of an army without training? This poll says no. They didn't learn anything, right? I mean, there's examples later on. We'll see. Funny story where it seems that you'll see the story. They had a shofar in one hand and a flame in the other hand, and that's how they fought. But it doesn't say what hand they used for their swords or whatever. They didn't need that. The guys just ran away. This was super miraculous. So if God can make the Jordan River split, right? It's not got a problem to make the goyim run away, right? Or kill each other. We had examples, right? In Shmuel, where Shmuel davened and all the Philistines killed each other. That's not a big deal for God to do that. And that's what Paul is saying. That's how it was originally. This was the first generation, the generation of what we call the third generation. Yeshua, the Zkenim, the next, the first ones who actually had to learn, right? And that was part of the test. You see, the reason why this was seen, they weren't leftists, they weren't pacifists, they weren't worried about the United Nations. No, they just had to learn to be soldiers. Oh, we're not used to doing that. How'd you learn to be a soldier? Yeshua, that was all miraculous. The Zkenim, that was all miraculous. Osnir ben Kenaz, Kalev, all these people fought those giants, that was all miraculous. Now they realized that it was not going to be like that. God doesn't have these